So this week I want to talk about it basically, as opposed to previous weeks where we kind of build a sugya around a particular midrash. Here was learning this Gemara in Zevahim, and it mentioned somebody named Ifra Hormiz, which is the queen mother of the Sassanid Empire. So basically want to explore kind of in the first half some stories about Ifra Hormiz, and Chazal have really, really positive things to say about her and what their relationship with her was. And what the context was, and then a fascinating machloket between really Rashi and Tosafot about different girsas in the Gemara that have very interesting ramifications on how you understand what her name represents. So just to kind of give 2 minutes of background, because when I was learning this was new to me, and then it was shocking to me how new this was to me, considering how much time we spend learning Gemara growing up, that the context of the rabbis of Bavel in 300, 400 CE, they're living through what's called the Sassanid Empire. And they were generally pretty tolerant of other minorities and other religions, which is why the Jews in Bavel had like a semi-autonomous governance. And basically there was a line of kings, and one of the kings was named Shapur Mלכא, as he's referred to in the Gemara. There were actually 3 Shapur Mלכәs in the history of the empire. From what I understand, the third one is not really mentioned in the Gemara. He may have came after the Gemara was more or less wrapped up. It's the second Shapur Mלכא who's mentioned a lot throughout Shas, mostly with positive intentions, or mostly in a positive light. And that Shapur Mלכא, we know from kind of external kind of academic knowledge, he actually reigned for 70 years. He became a king when he was a baby. And so while he was still a child, his mother, whose name was Ifra Hormiz, Imeya Deshבור Mלכא, she reigned as a queen mother in his stead until he became old enough. And even as he kind of became older, she still wielded heavy influence over kind of him and his decisions. She was close to the throne. So just to kind of learn a couple of interesting Gemaras on Shapur Mלכא, and then to talk about Ifra Hormiz. So if you just look at the first source, Bava Metzia on Kuf Yud Tet Amud Av, this is the very end of Masechet Bava Metzia. This is how it finishes. So you just go to the second line, it's talking about a specific halachic discussion, and then in the middle of the second line it says, Amar Ephraim Safra, Talmidos Sheresh Lakish, Mishum Resh Lakish, Halacha Rabbi Shimon. So in this particular discussion, the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon, Amro Kamei Deshבור Mלכא. They said, and the discussion here is about people who live kind of in on an upper floor and a lower floor, and they have kind of plants that drape down or drape up. Who has ownership over the plants? Something very kind of specific. So they said that the halacha followed Rabbi Shimon before Shapur Mלכא. Amar lehu apiryon nimtaye l'Rabbi Shimon. So apiryon means praise or beauty, and nimtaye is we will give or shower Rabbi Shimon. That basically this is Shapur Mלכא approving of the fact that the halacha followed Rabbi Shimon. But Shapur Mלכא, just to remind us, is a king of the Sassanid Empire. So the fact that he's being consulted for this very specific and technical halachic question is pretty interesting in its own right. And there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin which kind of is even more radical on Daf Mem Vav Amud Bet, where it says, Amar le Shapur Mלכא l'Rabbi Chama, Kvura min haTorah minayin. How do we know that you have a chiyuv when a person dies to bury them in the ground? Ishtik v'lo amar le v'lo midei. Rabbi Chama was silent; he didn't have a response. Amar v'acha bar Yaakov imsar alma biyada t'tipshai. The world has been handed over to fools, to idiots. Dibai le lememar ki kavor. There's a mitzvah about if someone's hanged, lo talin livnato ala boker ki kavor. So it says bury a person who was hanged. Right? It's a specific context of someone who was killed by Beit Din, but still. And the answer is dilei aved le Aaron. No, Shapur Mלכא could have responded if you said ki kavor. That means that you have to make an ark, not an ark, a coffin, but not necessarily that he has to be buried in the ground. What about tikburenu? It says ki kavor tikburenu. It uses kind of lashon kfula, kaful solo mashmele. Shapur Mלכא could say to you, I don't learn anything out from the fact that a word is repeated. It's just a grammatical device. And basically, Shapur Mלכא bests the rabbis in this discussion in a certain sense. So we see that you have here this king who is able to kind of battle and be on par with the rabbis. But he pales compared to his mother in terms of his involvement in halacha and his pro-rabbinic stance. So let's look at some examples of Ifra Hormiz, which is his mother. So the Gemara in Zevahim and Daf Kuf Tet Zayin Amud Bet says as follows. It's talking about whether you're allowed to build bamot, and we know you're not allowed to build bamot once the Beit HaMikdash was established. Bamot were outlawed, but that's only for Jews. Non-Jews, ostensibly not. Lefichach kol echad ve'echad boneh lo bama le'atzmo u'makriv alea kol ma she'yirtzeh. So non-Jew can build the bama in his backyard and do whatever he wants. There's no problem of Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach being violated in any way. Amar b'Yaakov Baruch Amar Rav Asi Asur l'sayan v'lasot shlichutan. As a Jew, you're not allowed to help them build the bama or be an agent for them, because we still have the prohibition. Amar Rabba u'leurinhu lehu shari, but you're allowed to instruct them on how to do it or teach them. Ki hadi Ifra Hormiz imed Shapur Mלכא shadre korbana l'Rava. So this queen mother, Ifra Hormiz, sent a korban to Rava. And she said, when she sent it, make sure that this is offered l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. So you can stop there, but basically the idea is that Ifra Hormiz is donating money to the rabbis and saying, or donating a korban and saying that this should be used for a holy purpose. Similarly in Bava Batra and Davchet, Ifra Hormiz imed Shapur Mלכא shadara arnika de dinari kamed Rav Yosef. So she sent a sizable amount of money to Rav Yosef. Amar lehavi lemitzvah rabba. And she said, use it for a great mitzvah, this money. She's giving tzedakah, basically. Yativ Rav Yosef v'kama'ayin, but my mitzvah rabba. So Rav Yosef now has to sit down and figure out what is a great mitzvah. What should this money be used for? Amar le'abai, miditani Rabbi Shmuel bar Yehuda, en posken tzedakah al yatomim, afilu lefidyon shvuyim, shma mina pidyon shvuyim mitzvah rabbi. So the context of that Gemara in Bava Batra in the first parak is around how important pidyon shvuyim is, and it trumps all these other mitzvot, and this is used as an example for that. A similar story in Bava Batra Daf Yud Amud Bet. Ifra Hormiz imed Shapur Mלכא shadra 400 dinari d'kamed Rabbi Ami v'lo kablinhu. She sent 400 dinar to Rabbi Ami for a similar type of purpose, and he wouldn't accept it. Shadartinu kamed Rava v'kablinu. And then she sent it to Rava, and he did accept it. Why? Mishum shlo malchut. Because remember that she's the queen mother, and if they reject or refuse to accept her donation, so it could have political or diplomatic ramifications. Shema Rabbi Ami ikpad. Rabbi Ami heard that Rava had accepted this donation, and he got upset or angry. Amar leitle bivosh ktsirati shel bana nashim ba'od meirot ota, which basically is a pasuk in Yeshaya, which he interprets to mean, why should we help the Sassanid Empire and take their donations and give them zchuyot? The Rava mishum shlo malchut, but Rava says it's not for them; it's for us in the sense that we need to maintain certain levels of diplomatic, peace. Right? Thank you. Rabbi Ami name mishum shlo malchut, but did Rabbi Ami not think that was important? No, of course he did. He felt that that money should have been distributed amongst the poor of the nations and not used for the Jews. Because if the non-Jews are giving money to the Jews and then they use that to support themselves, that could give a bad image, perhaps.
If hypothetically Israel were to get money from the United States, then some people might not see that so favorably.
Right. And if Israel then goes and uses it for themselves, as opposed to helping the goyim, right, which use that how you will. That
but that's literally the argument that's usually made when it comes to people who are against aid for other countries is, why are you sending money to X when there are poor people here? Right. So
exactly right. So you agree with Rabbi Ami, or you're claiming there are people who
I'm saying there are people out there. That's not.
He's understanding Rav Ami's objection. Yeah. Right. Fair enough. The Rava Nami I guess the difference would be, right, when the U.S. is giving money to Israel, it's giving money to Israel for the sake of Israel's defense. It's supposed to hear where it's not clear why she doesn't say in the previous story she said use it for mitzvah rabbah, but here it doesn't specify what her request to use the money for was.
Right, but either way, the objection of people will, people
not view it well.
Not view it well, exactly. It seems to be very relevant, a couple thousand years later.
Yep. The Rava Nami lani goyim yahavinu. And the Gemara says, well, don't worry, because that's what Rava did. He gave it to the poor people, of the poor Gentiles. So then what was Rabbi Ami's issue? Rabbi Ami, the ikpitz, why did he get upset? That when he was told about what Rava did, the concluding part that he gave it to the poor non-Jews, he wasn't told that. So he was just told that Rava took the money. He wasn't told what he used it for. So he thought he hadn't used it for what he was okay with it being used for, so he got upset. So again, aside from like what you mentioned about like the fact that these Gedolei Ador at the time, aside from they also clearly had kind of all this diplomatic stuff that was going on they had to deal with. But you see that this Ifra Hormiz has this very close relationship with Rava and with Rabbi Chama, all these people, and we'll touch on that in a minute because it's about to get way more intense. Just quickly, the Iyun Yaakov here, which is the commentary on the Gemara in Zevahim that we saw. So he says as follows. Well, basically, let's actually ask his question from the outside, right? Based on what we saw in this Gemara in Bava Batra, there's this idea of Shlom Malchut, that if the queen mother comes and tells you you do something, you do it. If we go back to our Gemara in Zevahim, where we started, so we had learned the halacha that it's okay to teach or help a non-Jew do a bama from the fact that Rava did it for Ifra Hormiz. That Ifra Hormiz sent a korban, and Rava kind of, we didn't read the rest of the Gemara, but he kind of instructed other people. He said, Amar Luhula Rav Safar Lav Acha. He basically told two other rabbis to go do this for Ifra Hormiz. But couldn't I just say that I can't learn from Rava's actions in that case that I'm allowed to help non-Jews build a bama, because maybe Rava was just acting mishum shalom malchut. And so that can't be kind of a case that I can generalize and say that I'm allowed to do that to help non-Jews generally to build a bama. So that's the Iyun Yaakov's question. So he says, right, ki had Ifra Hormiz, in the first line in the commentary there, kakasha ma raya mizu, right? What kind of proof is this? Ta'afilu haya isur, even if it was asur, even if it was prohibited for a non-Jew to help a non-Jew build a bama. Still, Rava could have done it for Hormiz mishum shalom malchut, because she sent him a korban and said, offer this korban l'shem shamayim. And if he refused because it's asur to help a non-Jew build a bama, so that probably there's larger implications at play here, right? Beyond just the pure kind of isur v'heter of the halacha. Right? And the question is even stronger because the Shas elsewhere says that about Rava himself. Right? And that's what we just learned. We could say that she had sent it to Rava and in order to make the offering. Right, that the continuation of the Gemara in Zevahim was not that Rava went and offered the korban, but Rava went and instructed other people to offer the korban, other rabbis. So his answer, I think, it's a bit of a stretch, but he basically says from the fact, we don't learn it from the fact that Rava ended up accepting it for Hormiz's korban and offering it, but from the fact that he went and instructed other people. That teaches me that it wasn't done just because of Shlom Malchut, because if it was just Shlom Malchut, he would have done it himself and not kind of dragged other rabbis into the story. So from there you can learn that he told them to do it, so that's to teach you that you can help a non-Jew build a bama, and Shlom Malchut doesn't apply in that particular case. Just like an interesting side note.
One possibility, just based on what we've seen, although this doesn't really hold water with other examples of like kirva malchut that we have, you could say that there's no actual isser of involved in taking the money and distributing it. Meaning when Rabbi Ami gets upset, he's bringing a pasuk from Yeshayahu as like musar more than like an actual isser,
right.
and then Shlom Malchut could overcome that concept, but not necessarily like an actual isser. That being said, we know of examples of actual isurim that Kirva Malchut does win out over. So this is all hypothetical.
Right. No, but that is a really good point. No, like what you said, the Yaakov could have instead answered that one was an isser and one was just kind of not the best way to behave, but not something that's actually a halachic prohibition.
Well, presumably because he knows that there are counterexamples to that elsewhere. Again, where you have like, you could argue that maybe for some reason Shlom Malchut and like Kirvala Malchut is somehow different, but it seems like it's the same concept. So assuming that like you have counterexamples, so he's not going to suggest something that he knows is disproved elsewhere.
Right. Yep. No, that's a good point. Okay, good. Two more Gemaras that ratchet up Ifra Hormiz considerably, and then Machloket Ratzi Tosfot about her name. So Nida Daf Chaf Amud Bet. Remember that she's the mother of the king of the Sassanid Empire, which was an empire that lasted for 400 years and spanned kind of a huge, right? Ifra Hormiz Yimei Deshvur Malcha Shadrei Adama Lekamed Rava. So this connects to SCP a little bit. So Ifra Hormiz, the queen mother, sent a nida cloth to Rava. Havayativ Rav Ovadia Kamein. Rav Ovadia, who was a student, I guess, of Rava's, was sitting before him. Arche, Rava smelled the cloth, smelled it. Amar la hai dam chimud. Who? And he smelled it and he said, "This is the blood of desire, not the blood of nida." Amrale livrei. She said to her son, Shavur Malka, learn from this how wise the Jews are, that he was able to understand that this was the blood of desire. Amarla dilma kesuma baruba. So Shvur Malka says to her, maybe he's like a blind man in a chimney, which is, I think, maybe he was just lucky and he guessed. Right? I think that's what that means. In other words, Shvur Malka is not convinced that from the fact that Rava just said, oh, this is not Dam Nida, that suddenly now the Jews are, they may have just gotten lucky. So Hadar Shadrale Shitin Mine Dama. So then Ifra Hormiz sent Rava 60 different types of Dam Nida. V'chulu Amrinu, and he guessed all of those different types right. Hahu Batra Dam Kinim Hava. The last of the 60 was actually lice blood. Hava Veloyada, and Rava didn't know what that one was. Istaya Milta, which I think he got help. It's not clear for me. I should check actually what Rashi says on it. It's not clear if that means he got help, like Siyata Deshmaya, or what that means he got help. V'shadarla Srikuta de Mekatla. And he sent her a comb that's used to kind of kill lice, as like a sign that he knew it was lice blood. Amra Yehudai betavne deliba yatviu. Yatvitu. The Jews dwell within the hearts of people, right? That they know kind of the most intimate things about people. So first of all, here you have a portrait of Shvur Malka, just as an interesting aside, a little bit less favorable to Jews than kind of the ones we saw earlier, where he is like involved in the halachic debates. Here he seems to be a little bit more skeptical, but regardless, if Hormiz is sending, and she's not Jewish, she's sending nida cloths to Rava. Yeah?
He's probably pretty young at that point, though. If that's a factor, he probably hasn't like.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that he's skeptical.
I mean, she's young enough to be a nida, right? Which means that he is presumably relatively young, so he could just be a cynical teenager.
Yeah. Also, about Shvur Malka being involved in the halacha, I think it could just be that, like, just like someone would go to like a court, right? You go to like the legal court. So then at that time it was going. I guess it was before the king would make these. Maybe the king was the court. So maybe it wasn't necessarily. It was more like a legal thing, like, oh, this guy's in my property, and they're trying to like, fight over that and settling it in that way as opposed to just Besdin.
Okay. Interesting. So you're interpreting got it. You're saying the rabbis had to go to Shvur Malka.
It could be that one of the parties, they brought them to court. Like, you know what I mean?
Yep. I don't know enough to say whether, it's a possibility for sure. I think that works well for the first case of Mitzia. The second one in Sanhedrin, where they kind of put into Shvur Malka's mouth like a shakli v'talya about, do you darshan kavor tikbarenu?
It could be he brought the rabbis to the court. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's, for sure, it's possible. There's definitely interesting dynamics here. I mean, about what the kind of them having a good relationship, but always in the back of it, this lurking that they are very powerful and at any point could. Yeah. But I never thought of that. But it's I'd be interested to hear if anyone anyone proposes that as kind of a way to understand the Gemara. That's a good point. Okay, in the Gemara in Tanya, Daf Chavdal, this is the last story of Ifra Hormiz I want to do. Hu Gavra di Chayev Negada b'Veidina de Rava. And notice a lot of them are with Rava, by the way. So, yeah. So there was a person who was was liable for lashes in Rava's Beis Din, Mishum de Baal Nochrit, right? He had relations with a non-Jewish woman, and the punishment that Rava administered to him was lashes. Nagde Rava Umit. Rava lashed him and he died. Ishtama milta be Shavur Malka ba'alit salrei l'Rava. So this was made known in the house of Shavur Malka, who was the king. He wanted to do tsaras for Rava. He wanted to make his life difficult from the fact that he killed somebody. Amr le'Ifra Hormiz imei de Shavur Malka livrei. So the queen mother said to her son, the king, La lehave lach esek dvarim ba'ada Yehudai. D'chol man debayin mimarayhu yativ lehu. Don't start getting involved with the Jews, because anything that they want from their master, he gives to them. In other words, God. Amar la, mahi, what are you talking about? Bain rachamei v'ati mitra. She said, if they daven, then it will rain. Amar la, he said to her, and here we see a bit of the teenage, perhaps, cynicism from the previous Gemara. Ha'u mishum dezimna demitrahu. That's because they daven in the winter, so it's going to rain anyways. Let's see them daven now in the summer and have rainfall. So she sent to Rava, daven and make it rain. So Rava davened and it did not rain. Amar lefanav Ribono shel olam, Elohim bo'oznenu shamanu avotenu sipru lanu po'al pa'alta bimehem bimekedem ve'anu beinenu lo ra'inu. So Rava davened to God and said, he quotes Tehillim that we heard about all these wonders that you did for our ancestors, but we haven't seen any of those miracles. Ata mitra ad shvuch mar zeveh de machoza de diglat. So it rained so much that the gutters of Machoza spilled over into the Diglat, which is the Tigris River. It flooded. There was a lot of rain. Ata, and this is the end of the story, which is very interesting. It's worth a share in its own right, I think. Ata avua itchazele bechelme v'amarle miika dematrach kamesh maya kulehai. Rava's father appeared to him in a dream and said to him, "Who's this? Who's bothering Shemaim so much? Right? Who's burdening Shemaim so much with his tefillah?" Amar le shani duchtaich. And then Rava's father said to him, change your place, don't stay where you are. Shani duchtei, he changed his place. And the next morning he saw his bed had been kind of stabbed with knives. Anyway, so there's a lot going on there, but what we see here, I think, is the most clear example of Ifra Hormiz being just more from than the Jews themselves. In other words, such a believer in God and His power and sending Nidaklosi. So, how much of this is historical, how much of this is, but it's clear the rabbis had very, very positive things to say about Ifra Hormiz, and their relationship with her was very important. Which is why it's interesting, if we now go into the world of the Rishonim, what does her name mean? Was this her actual name? Is this a name that's given to her by the rabbis? So before we talk about that, just a bit of context. So the Sassanid Empire, they were Zoroastrians. And the Zoroastrians basically was dualism. They had a god that was the all-powerful God, that was uncreated and it was all good, all beneficial, basically the way that we would describe Hashem in a lot of ways. And then they had this evil god, and they were in constant war with each other. A big part of Zoroastrianism is that there's this conflict and how you resolve the conflict and all that. But the way the good God is described is similar in a lot of ways in terms of benevolent, omniscient, to how monotheistic Judaism understood God. The name of the god in Zoroastrianism was Ahura Mazda. But that was in the earlier iterations of Zoroastrianism from before the Sassanid Empire. By the time it got to the Sassanid Empire, that name had morphed into Hormiz. The Hormiz was the name of God, essentially, for the Zoroastrians, or at least the good God. And it's with that we look at the Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Lamed Tet Amud Aleph at the bottom of the page. Amar le'ahu amgusha le'amemar. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. So a amgusha is like a magi, whatever the word is. A priest said to Amemar, "Mipilgach le'iloi de Hormiz, mipilgach le'titoi de Hormiz." So from the stomach up is the domain of Hormiz. From the stomach down is the domain of Hormiz. Amar le, Memar said to this Zoroastrian priest, Im ken, if that were true, hechi shavik le Hormizd lehormiz lavore maya ba'are. So how could it be that when you, basically the commentaries say, when you drink water through your mouth, it comes out when you urinate through the bottom. That that this is really an allegory for the priest saying that there's two powers, like the half and half, and then a memar saying no, they're all connected. It's one body. It's one power. So there's a polemical component to the story. But what does Hormiz and a Hormiz mean? Okay, so. I jumped the gun a little bit. Let's just go back to the Rashis first, right? We said Ifra Hormiz. So we're going to talk about Hormiz now, but Ifra, let's just understand what Ifra means. So Rashi in his commentary to Ben Porat Yosef in the Brachot of Yaakov. So what does Ben Porat mean? It means Ben Chen, V'hu Lashon Arami, Apiryan Amtiel Rabbi Shimon B'sof Bava Metzia. That word Apiryan, Rashi says that's Aramaic, and it means grace or beauty or praise, which is the context it's used there by Shvur Malka, and so Ifra means beauty. Rashi and Nida says similarly. Ifra Hormiz Nochrit Haita, she was a non-Jew. V'chein Shema, this was her name, Ifra Hormiz. V'achal pi chen Haita meshemeret atzma minidot u'krova litgayer. She kept Nida and she almost converted. V'af korbanot Haita shalach, and she also sent korbanot. U'lashon Yivani Ifra chen kamo apiryonim Taylor Rabbi Shimon. So here Rashi he says here that it's Greek, this Ifra, instead of Aramaic, so there seems to be a steer on Rashi. And also he himself here seems to contradict, where he says first her name was Ifra Hormiz, her Persian name presumably, but then he says that the Ifra is a Greek word meaning beauty. Suffice it to say Ifra comes from this idea of beauty. But what about the Hormiz? Let's get to the next Rashi in Sanhedrin. So he says, the Hormiz, right, the priest had said the upper, from the stomach up, is the domain of Hormiz. Shed, this is a demon or an evil power. Kedamar Hormiz bar lilta bava batra. There's a Gemara in Bava Batra in the context of those famous. There's a whole sugya of these stories of Rabba Bar Chana with all these crazy hyperbolic stories. So within the context of those Gemaras, there's a story of a demon, the child of Lilith, who's the famous demon, and his name there is Hormiz, according to Rashi. So this is proof that Hormiz is a demon. And then the lower half of the body was Hormiz, with an aleph in the beginning. So Rashi says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kari Hachi. He says this is how they refer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which to me is shocking. I think what Rashi means here is what I was saying before, that's how they refer to their HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is this Ahura Mazda Hormiz. So Ahura, that's how it's translated into the Gemara. But basically the good God. That's how Rashi understands it.
To be exactly the opposite.
Being on top? What do you mean?
Also, if she is Ifra Hormiz, then you would expect her to be like connected to the good one, not the bad one.
Beautiful. Let's see Tosfos. Very good. You're right on point. So Tosfos in Sanhedrin says the following: Bekuntros garas kama below aleph. So the first Hormiz is just Hormiz without an aleph. Ubatra be'aleph. The second one starts with an aleph. Rabbeinu Tam garis tarvayu below aleph. They're both start with the hay. Elakama Hormiz bezayin. Kmo Ifra Hormiz. Shu lashon chen me'et hamakom. Ifra kmo apiryonim taye. Uvatra Hormin benun. Kmo Hormin bar lilta. So Rabbeinu Tam has a different girsa. He says they both agree that the first one is Hormiz, but the question is the second one Hormiz or is the second one Hormin? And they then also have a difference in Girsa and Bava Batra with the demon is the demon Hormiz, which aligns it with the upper one in Sanhedrin, or is the demon Hormin, which aligns it with the lower one in Sanhedrin. So you have this Girsa kind of difference in how to understand that. But as you said, if we understand it according to Tosfot, and he actually spells it out explicitly in the next Tosfot, in his commentary on Bava Batra, Perish Rabbeinu Chanana, which is the same idea, the Mashma'ut halashon chen me'et hamakom. What does Ifra Hormiz mean? So Ifra, we said, meant grace or beauty, and then Hormiz is God. Okay, so me'et hamakom, right? So Ifra kmo apiryonim Tyler b'Shimon, and at this point he agrees with Rashi that that's what Ifra means. Hormiz Shem Shechina, and Hormiz is the name of the Shechina. Ki ahi d'sof perek achad dinamama da 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 da. Mipaga didachu le'el de Hormiz bezayin. The upper half is Hormiz. Mipalga l'tachad the Hormin benun kmo Hormin bar lilta lekaman. So here Tosfot, I think what you said about the fact that now Ifra Hormiz's name makes a lot more sense. And also it means that God is the good is the upper half of the body, which also I think is more intuitive. And Tosfot acknowledges your kasha on Rashi, where Tosfot and Gittin on Yud Aleph, if you just skip to the bottom, where he kind of repeats himself what we learned in the other Tosfots and the other Gemaras. But then the last line, V'lo kirashi de pirish perik sheni denida, de yofi shel shedim hayula. That what does Ifra Hormiz means? It means that she's the beauty of a demoness, right? She had the beauty of Lilith, as it were. That's why her name was Ifra Hormiz. It's a bit more difficult to understand. And that's why Tosfot has a different girsa and a different interpretation. Rashbam, just to kind of wrap up, Rashbam, right? He was somewhere in between. He was a Tosfos, he was a Rashi's grandson, but he was also in his commentary on Batra. He says, "Benun garsinan kach shamati mi Abba Mari." So Rashbam says, "I heard from my father that it's Hormin and not Hormiz." So this is like Tosfot, like Rabbeinu Tam. The demon's name was Hormin. Avani shamati Hormiz b'zayin shed. But I've also heard that Hormiz with the Zayin is a demon. So he seems to combine them. He says, he says that the Gemara in Sanhedrin he agrees with Rashi, but the Gemara in Bava Batra he agrees more with Tosfot in terms of his girsa. So it's a little bit confusing. But when the dust settles, the way we understand it is Hormiz, according to Rashi, is a demon. Hormiz is this Ahura Mazda / Hormizd, the god, the benevolent, omniscient creator god of Zoroastrianism. And for Tosfot, it's exactly the opposite. That Hormiz is God or Shechina, and then Hormin is a demon of some kind, of the child of Lilith. So what's kind of, again, fascinating about all of this is whether Ifra Hormiz was a real name or not. In other words, it's clear that this Hormiz here is derived from the fact that Hormiz was the name, or Hormuz was the name of the god of the Zoroastrians. And in fact, Ifra Hormiz's husband, who was Shapur Malka's father, his name was Hormizd the first, from what I understand. So you see, it's interesting. Machlokes Rashi Tosfot lived, a few hundred years later, but they are kind of acknowledging that Hormiz or Hormiz or whatever it is a name. Like I would have thought, and this is what was surprising to me, is that like Rashi, when he says Hormiz HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kari Hachi, I would have thought he would have said that's how they refer to their version of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Tosfot, when he says that's Shechina or Hamakom, that's their version of the Shechina. So I don't really fully understand that point, but it is fascinating that that's how they kind of refer to it.
Right. I guess you could say maybe it's comparable to Allah as the name of the Muslim God, but also just as the name for God in Arabic, right?
Right.
Meaning, it's easy. It's a little easier because they're monotheistic.
Right.
Although actually, it's really interesting. There's a conversation in Gush Rabbinic alumni group today, literally messages today, about whether Zoroastrianism is Avodah Zarah.
Really? How could it not be? It's dualistic.
Right. So what was answered by someone was basically that it's definitely Avodah Zarah in terms of the belief, but since they don't have like images, they don't have like. So then the question becomes similar to like Protestant Christianity, where you could, they're basically different approaches as to whether it would be like usher to step foot in their temple or not.
Got it. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, actually, I should be more specific. The question was about whether it's okay to go into the temple, not about whether.
I think it's hard to argue that.
Or not,
yeah,
right.
I think it's hard to argue that it's not dualistic. But
yeah.
Right, and it's also I think they used fire, but it wasn't that they worshipped fire. It was a vehicle to worship Hormizd. So it wasn't that they were, So their temples there was always fire, but it wasn't fire worship. It was something else. That's interesting. Okay. So,
Shkoyach.